This study, Bracing for Impact, assesses the seismic conditions and resilience of Zafferana Etnea's built environment, offering insights through seismic zoning into how at risk the community is to structural collapse. This study was carried out on the Italian island of Sicily, located in the Mediterranean. Zafferana Etnea is on Mount Etna's eastern flank, located 30 kilometers from Catania. Sicily has many active fault lines running through it, with the Siculo-Calabrian seismic belt being where the largest earthquakes have occurred in southern Italy for over 6 centuries. This figure shows that many smaller events have occurred around Zafferana Etnea, averaging around a 2.0 magnitude but relatively close to the surface. When earthquakes occur close to the surface, more damage usually occurs. Assessing the structural integrity of buildings is important in case bigger earthquakes were to occur in this area. Adding to the seismic background, this area has experienced numerous larger scaled earthquakes in the last 200 years, which have caused large amounts of damage, like in 1984, which resulted to 70% of homes becoming uninhabitable, likely as a result of unkept building codes. The history of building codes in Italy is sparse, with a lack of readily available information, though we do know that there have been 3 major adaptations to them from 1974 to 2009, which show an understanding of their kneading techniques. Reinforced concrete structures and base isolation are some of the examples from the 2009 code, aiding to be more resilient towards earthquakes. This is an important consideration, as during ground shaking, buildings need to be able to withstand the effects of this. Parameters such as good building design, flexibility, and the use of strong construction materials enables foundations to absorb or redistribute seismic waves. Retrofitting is needed in built areas of high earthquake damage risk, especially when occurring at shallow depth. Features which can be an indication of high earthquake damage risk includes soft stories, which are ground floors with large openings, for example a garage door or shop front. Short columns, which are half floors located in between the main stories. Heavy overhangs, which are decorative parts of a building like balconies. And visual construction quality of buildings, which can range from good to poor depending on surface cracks, foundation quality and other factors. These features are highlighted here in the pictures taken in the field during our study. Using this prior research to ensure an understanding of vulnerable building features allowed our study to take place effectively. Our study aimed to quantify seismic structural risk of buildings across Zafferana Etnea through the use of in-field data collection. This was reinforced by our research objectives and allows for the identification of trends in risk and what parameters significantly increase this in Zafferana Etnea. Here is the risk assessment that was conducted prior to the trip, used to address any issues which may occur. This included identified risks such as language barriers, weather, and injury while in the field. Our walking routes were split in half over 2 days, which were adapted in situ to ensure a good proportion of building stock was analysed within the time constraints. Along these routes, we sampled every 6th building systematically and picked unique buildings as points of interest for a purposive sampling following the same methodology. This methodology was based upon a previous study carried out in Turkey, which we adapted to Zafferana Etnea. The risk factors for each building assessed were identified, then subtracted from the base score, which is given on the number of stories a building has. This final score then shows how at risk the building is, ranging from above 100 at no risk to below 30 at high risk. This was adapted for our study, with our changed parameters highlighted in red. The grouping for number of stories was changed based on our pilot study a few days prior. The age of building was changed to fit into the Italian building codes, as this was felt to be the most relevant years of change for the study area. The earthquake risk score values were changed for our data range once calculated post-field work. To conduct a hazard assessment, we followed these steps, which include finding the building's GPS location, its number of stories, the score reduction values, and calculation of the earthquake risk scores and risk status. This short video shows us conducting a building assessment in Zafferana Etnea.
So we're on Via Roma, house number 302. There is 2 stories and it has a flat roof. We are a soft story building as we have a garage.
There's overhang from the
Heavy overhang from a balcony, from 2 balconies. And there's
no short column.
no short column. Pounding effect, yes, due to the differences in houses.
It's still zero.
And this one.
No topographic impact.
No. Visual construction quality. Looks, yes.
It does look like some
When you went over, was there cracks in the building?
There might have been a few, but I don't think any of them were into the foundation. I think they were just superficial cracks in the paint.
Age of the building looks pre-19.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the coordinates for the left-hand side, the left-hand corner of the building are 37 degrees, 41 minutes, 38.5 seconds north, and 15 degrees, 6 minutes, 24.8 seconds east.
This is a sample of the digitised data from the field survey. This figure shows building locations with their earthquake risk scores. Here we start to see trends in where is more at risk in Zafferana Etnea. Clusters of moderate and high risk is noted within the central streets, and as we move into the outskirts and residential streets, the lower to no risk scores are more prevalent. This is our zoning of Zafferana Etnea based on risk status, showing more clearly areas of different risk. This reinforces observations about areas of risk, with the central streets of town having higher risk areas than the outskirts and residential areas with minimal outliers. These images were taken from the field study and shows an average house with no risk, low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. 78% of the buildings assessed had at least some level of seismic structural risk, with 67% of these being low risk. 22% of buildings in Zafferana Etnea are at no risk to structural damage from earthquakes. 52% of buildings in Zafferana Etnea are at low risk, 18% of buildings are at a moderate risk, and only 8% of buildings are at high risk. The low-risk buildings had a mean ERS of 87 and comprised of roughly a 6:1 systematic purposive ratio. The most common risk factors present were overhangs and soft stories, and every building had under 5 stories total. Moderate risk buildings had a mean ERS of 67, with 3/4 having an at-risk roof shape, with a systematic to purposive ratio of roughly 2:1. The most common risk factors identified in this risk status were soft stories and overhangs. Over 90% had a moderate or poor visual construction quality. High-risk buildings had a mean ERS of 27, with a ratio of 2.5:1 systematic to purposive. Every building in this category had a soft story and an overhang, and 6 out of 7 buildings in this risk status had an at-risk roof shape. No risk buildings made up the final 22% of buildings assessed, having a mean ERS of 114. This was the only category to have a building with a topographic impact as a risk factor, which is where a building is on a slope of greater than 30 degrees. A total of 89 buildings made up our dataset over an area of 329,214 metres squared. 100% of these structures had at least one risk factor attributed to them, with the top three most common categories being roof shape, the presence of a soft story, and heavy overhangs. The largest risk status was low risk, making up 75% of the zoned area. The smallest area was high risk, comprising of 3% of zoning in Zafferana Etnea. 18% of Zafferana Etnea was zoned based on our data collection. However, visual analysis shows 50 to 60% of buildings are included within our zoned areas. The average ERS of our entire dataset was 87, meaning that on average, the town of Zafferana Etnea is at a low risk. Visual analysis highlights several trends across Zafferana Etnea. A hotspot of high to moderate risk buildings are located closer to the town centre, which is the location of the town hall, church, plaza and gardens. Buildings in the centre of the town, specifically in the plaza, have no roof risk. Large areas outside of central Zafferana Etnea have low risk and no risk. Heavy overhangs are visible throughout Zafferana Etnea, especially along Via Garibaldi and Via Roma on moderate to high risk buildings. A small cluster of moderate risk buildings exists near the southern border of our study area. Pounding effect is present on busy, more developed streets as opposed to houses further from the town centre that have more space between the structures. Multiple strengths were highlighted through our study. The customization of risk factors within our seismic structural risk classification allowed for the study to be applicable to Zafferana Etnea. The refinement of these factors was supported in our pilot study to ensure the correct parameters fit the location. The assessments for each building were very efficient, getting down to 45 seconds for one building. This allowed a representative sample of the town to be assessed within the time limit. The use of resource packs and specific role allocation within the field allowed for a rapid assessment to be undertaken. Adaptations on the fly were conducted, such as the change to Google Street View to finish the study. This allowed for a comprehensive and representative data collection to be completed despite lack of being in the field. Our study did compose of some limitations. Focusing on denser areas could have skewed results, meaning that while the centre of Zafferana Etnea was assessed fully, there may be areas of higher risk status in less dense areas, but have been missed due to the lack of ability to assess them within the time limit. This was somewhat mitigated with the purposive methodology, ensuring historic buildings, buildings of interest, and buildings at a state of collapse were not excluded. There were issues with construction quality and building age, as they were more difficult to determine, resulting in open discussions in the field. This could have led to a difference in opinions and results depending on who was assessing the building. Weather conditions caused the end of in-field data collection on day 2, with us finishing the study remotely. These images from Google Street View were from 5 to 10 years ago, meaning that buildings could have changed and been updated since then, but we wouldn't know, therefore hindering our assessment's accuracy in a contemporary context. If this study was to be replicated, more days should be allocated to in-field data collection to ensure a larger sample is taken to be able to survey the town as a whole. This could also be done through the division of the team. A more in-depth preliminary investigation to have a better understanding of these characteristics in town should be conducted to ensure in-field parameter decisions were more objective. Now the area is better understood, risk factors and values could be refined further. Increased documentation of the study would have allowed for replications of the study to be made more easily accessible. To conclude, we believe that this study was greatly successful and we achieved our aims and objectives. We successfully quantified the earthquake structural risk of Zafferana Etnea buildings and identified key indicators. A representative sample of the town was taken over a 2-day study period, with adaptations made to ensure as much primary data was collected as possible. Zoning of the town identified different classifications of structural risk levels across Zafferana Etnea. Overall, our research concluded that the town of Zafferana Etnea is largely at low risk to structural seismic damage, and the leading factors of structural risk in Zafferana Etnea are heavy overhangs, soft stories, and roof shape. And finally, here are the references. Thank you for your attention.